Hi, everyone. This will be a brief overview of the fallacy known as persuasive definition. Like all fallacies, this is a mistaken reasoning. That's what a fallacy is. And this particular one involves defining a term in a manner that's meant to predispose the listener to have either a positive or a negative reaction. So a non-persuasive definition would strive to define terms in some sort of neutral capacity as much as possible. But a persuasive definition tries to do the opposite. It tries to, in a way, make whatever they're going to talk about, whatever they're going to define, look either better or worse than it would actually be on a neutral definition. So I'll start with an example. So I was some years ago in a church for some reason, and they had some documents that were meant to inform the congregation about the political views of candidates in an upcoming election. But as a church, the leader assured everyone that this wasn't meant to tell anyone how they're supposed to vote. They weren't trying to influence anyone or bias anyone. It's just neutral information, right? Simple information about the positions that the candidates hold. And then it's up to the parishioners, the voters, to decide who they think the best candidate is and to vote for that person. All right, so that all sounds fine, right? If you could actually carry through with that. But when it came to looking at the actual literature, it was pretty clear that the church was in favor of one candidate over another based on how they defined the policy positions of the competing candidates. So the candidate that was pretty clearly disliked by the church, this particular church, was described as being pro-infanticide. So of course, infanticide is murdering infants, and most people, I assume, are against that and would assume it's a bad thing, right? It's pretty obvious. You shouldn't kill young children. It's a good rule. But of course, the position that was being described as pro-infanticide was what, in a more neutral sense, might be described as pro-choice. So this candidate in question was in favor of allowing people to have abortions, right? To keep abortion legal and to support the rights of people to make that choice if they wanted to, under the various conditions that existed under the current laws. So if you're having a debate about abortion, which of course is perfectly reasonable, there are different reasonable views about that, about the ethics of it, and political ramifications, and so on. You could have a real discussion about the subject. But if you start off by defining abortion as pro-infanticide, right, as being in favor of killing young children, you're already stacking the deck against the person who holds that view, right? You're basically saying, well, my opponent here is a baby killer, so it's up to you to decide if you want to vote for the baby killer or not. You can see how that's a persuasive definition, right? It's hardly a neutral definition of abortion. Now, even if somebody thinks abortion is wrong, and even if it's true that it is, right? Let's assume that for the sake of argument. It would still be a bad argument to support that by simply defining abortion as being in favor of infanticide. That's a very loaded way to paint your opponent, and it doesn't really give a good reason for anyone to reject abortion as being ethically acceptable or politically wise or whatever the debate's about, simply because it's not interested in having an honest debate about the subject. If it were, it would try to define the central terms in as neutral a fashion as possible to try and be fair to the other side. But instead, in this case, the subject under discussion was defined in a very persuasive fashion, right? So just ask yourself, would you rather vote for the baby killer or the one who doesn't want to kill babies, right? It's just, the church is just giving you neutral information here. It's up to you to decide. We're not telling you how to vote. Clearly, that was in pretty bad faith, right? It was pretty obvious that the church had a view, but wasn't being honest about it, was pretending just to offer this neutral information that clearly was not neutral at all. And like I said, to identify this as a fallacy does not require you to have any particular views about the subject. So you could be in favor of abortion, you can be completely against it in all cases, you can fall somewhere in between. The fact remains that this particular line of reasoning was not good. It involved a mistake in reasoning because it wasn't attempting an honest, fair accounting of the different positions in the debate. One side was being presented as reasonable, and the other was just by definition effectively dismissed as unreasonable. So that's just an example of persuasive definition. The general mistake is anytime you take an important term or some kind of concept and define it, right, for the sake of discussion in some sort of loaded way, in a way that could be either positive or negative, but which is meant to influence the persons to whom you're speaking, whether that's someone with whom you're having an argument or just an audience you're trying to convince of adopting a certain view that doesn't already have it. And the reason this is a mistake is because simply defining terms in ways that support views that we like doesn't prove or support anything, right? You can define terms however you want and say, well, look, my view is true and my view is reasonable simply because by definition, I win. I get to define the terms. And you can see that's just linguistic trickery, right? We're just defining terms or words in new ways, perhaps in ways that they're not ever used in actual linguistic use outside of the particular context in which we're introducing them. So that's something to be on the watch for. You want to avoid doing it yourself, either on purpose or by accident, at least if you're trying to be logical and a critical thinker. And probably more importantly, you want to be on the lookout for other people who are doing this, right? So if somebody sets up some controversial issue in a way that makes it look simple and easy because they simply define the term in a way that supports their view, then we should be suspicious because the persuasive definition fallacy has a good chance of being used in that case. And we'd want to be careful before we just accept what that person is saying. Okay, so I hope that's helpful. Just a brief account. I'll see you next time.